Good evening, everyone. I am here to talk to you tonight about stealth infections. And I know most of us are trying to prepare for Thanksgiving, so I will try to keep this short and sweet and to the point, not as long-winded as my last video. And I did also want to say, if you're in the Midwest, you know that basically today was a snow day. So I work at the University of Minnesota, and the university was closed, so there was no work today. And I already had the day off because I had decided I was going to take vacation today. So I wasn't going to work either way today, but it did snow a lot here in Minnesota and throughout the Midwest. So not as much as, we expected, but they closed down the university and a lot of, all the schools in surrounding area as well, because we were supposed to get like up to 13 inches, and it's the day before Thanksgiving. So I think they were just kind of a little bit lax with it. So now that I've given everyone a chance to hop on here, I'm going to go straight into my, information about stealth infection. So I'm going to start talking about parasites, and I'll explain why I'm starting with parasites in just a little bit. Like I discussed yesterday, or the day before, last time I came on here, I can't write and talk at the same time for some reason. I will practice and maybe I will get better at that. But right now I'm not very good at that. So while I'm writing, I'm probably not going to be talking. So the reason why I'm starting with parasites is because, as Dr. J says, if you have a pulse, you have parasites. Now, that might be, a little bit of a stretch, and I think he's exaggerating when he says that, but it's very common nowadays. It used to be that, everyone thought parasites were only when you were, traveling to a different country and you drank the water, when it wasn't boiled and, things like that. That's not the case anymore. Parasites are in our water, in our food, and they are very, very common. Many times when people are tested for parasites, however, tests come back negative. And the reason is that parasites are very good at evading our immune system, and they don't live in our blood for very long. So there are some parasites that live in red blood cells, but they're not going to be in our bloodstream. So if you're given a parasite test that's a blood test, it's not going to be accurate. It's going to more than likely show no parasites because the parasites aren't living in your blood. Now, the other test that they use for parasites is a stool sample. The issue with that is, again, you're taking a moment of time and saying that there's no parasites. That's not necessarily true. It just means there are no parasites in that sample. So that being said, I wanted to explain a little bit more about why parasites are kind of at the center of this discussion about stealth infections. One reason is because parasites can actually hold on to 6 to 8 times their weight in heavy metals. So when we're talking about stealth infections and toxicity, we have to include heavy metals in that discussion. Because heavy metals can also be related with a suppressed immune system. So parasites can suppress our immune system, so can heavy metals, and parasites can actually hold 6 to 8 times their weight in heavy metals. Another thing that parasites do is they live in a biofilm. So there's a biofilm layer that's protecting the parasite, and it absorbs these heavy metals and makes it part of the biofilm, which then protects it even more. And that's one of the ways that parasites basically stay protected from our immune system. So the other thing that parasites do as they hold on to viruses. So viruses can actually be living with parasites. So I think you'll find where I'm going with this is that when you're going to be doing a detox, and I'm talking about stealth infections and toxicities. When I talk about detox, I'm talking about these stealth infections, cellular detoxification and getting rid of these pathogens and toxicities that are suppressing our immune system and allowing the stealth infections to continue to evade our immune system. So when you're going through and you're detoxing your body from these pathogens, parasites have to be the first priority. And this isn't all. I have two more things to add to this that can coexist with parasites. So one of those is Lyme. And the other thing that you might not know is that Lyme bacteria itself isn't what really makes us sick for people that have chronic Lyme disease. It's actually the biotoxins that are released by Lyme and the co-infections of Lyme, because Lyme is typically not by itself the bacteria. It also has parasites and other infections that live with it. And one of those parasites is Babesia. And Babesia is a parasite that lives in the red blood cells. And it can actually change the surface proteins so that it evades the immune system that way. And then also just by being, within the red blood cells, it's evading the immune system. But people that have anemia, it could be that they have Babesia, and that's living in the red blood cells and destroying, the red blood cells and causing anemia and fatigue. So especially if you already have Lyme and you know that you have anemia, you should probably figure out if Babesia is the cause of that and try to get that taken care of. So the other thing I was going to mention that also lives within parasites or with parasites are mold spores. So similar to Lyme, mold spores aren't really what make us sick. It's the mycotoxins that are produced by the mold. And so mycotoxins and biotoxins by Lyme, they are very potent and very toxic to us. And so that's why people that have mycotoxins and Lyme and other biotoxin illnesses are so incredibly sick. And these are also difficult to get rid of. Just for, I guess clarity, another example of a biotoxin illness is tuberculosis. So, if you think about that, that's a pretty serious illness. And in addition, biotoxins have been used in warfare and to kill people. So, this is not a mild condition, if you will. But anyway, so mycotoxins then and biotoxins are both related to something called CIRS. Am I getting, okay, it's still on there. So I'll write it over here so it doesn't get, or maybe here, I'll write it like this. Chronic inflammatory response syndrome. That's what CIRS is. And it's from the biotoxins that are from Lyme and other illnesses, and mycotoxins from mold. And chronic inflammatory response syndrome, this used to be called mold illness, but they changed the name of it because they realized that it wasn't just mold that causes it. But this is where, you know, a lot of people have extreme pain with this because this inflammation is systemic, and it's causing problems in the brain, in the joints, in the you know, intestines. I mean, just everywhere throughout the body. And also inflammation in the brain can cause other issues with cognition, you know, brain fog, memory lapse. So another thing is that a lot of times these two mycotoxins and biotoxins, so, you know, Lyme and mold, they go either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, because what is seen is the symptom. And the symptom is the chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So the pain and the, you know, the insomnia and the brain fog and all the other things that go along with CIRS. And then a person gets diagnosed with something like multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. So, I mean, RA and MS, those are autoimmune. And, you know, usually you have to have specific biomarkers to be diagnosed with these. But I have, you know, I have worked with clients that have been diagnosed with RA and MS and then later found out that they had an underlying mold or Lyme biotoxin or mycotoxin kind of triggering that. So, and I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and that's another autoimmune disease. And that's also related with Epstein-Barr virus. So that's EBV. And when the immune system is suppressed, so all of these heavy metals, parasites, mycotoxins, and biotoxins can all suppress the immune system. And that can then lead to activated Epstein-Barr virus, which, of course, one of the symptoms with that is chronic fatigue. And Epstein-Barr virus actually lives within the white blood cells. So when you talk about long-term issues with Epstein-Barr virus, and I will mention this, Epstein-Barr virus is very, very common. 90% of adults have been infected with Epstein-Barr virus at some point in their life. And if you were a kid when you got it, you probably didn't have hardly any symptoms. But when you get a little bit older, you do sometimes then develop mononucleosis or mono. But that being said, it's supposed to be controlled by your immune system. And when it's not, it's reactivated. And when it's constantly being reactivated, then it can lead to things like autoimmunity and even cancer, like lymphoma and leukemia. So that's why this is important. I know that sometimes it can just be a little bit overwhelming when you have a chronic illness to be like, oh my gosh, there's so many different things. You know, that's kind of what I went through. I knew I had Hashimoto's, but I didn't know about all of this. And when I started to learn about it, at first it was overwhelming because I was like, oh my gosh, now I have to deal with mold. I found out I had mycotoxins. I have 5 strains. And then I found out also that I have activated Epstein-Barr virus. I also have a strong genetic predisposition to mercury toxicity based on a DNA test that I did. And I also have a very strong sensitivity to glyphosate. That's not one that I even wrote on here because it's not really related to parasites, but glyphosate is a huge, huge problem. in our environment because it has been so widely used that it's now pretty much everywhere in our drinking water and in the urine of almost everyone tested. So again, this is talking about suppressing the immune system. When our immune system is suppressed by all of these different things that I was pointing at earlier, then it basically feeds the system, because when our immune system is suppressed, these stealth infections flourish. And I'll also add another stealth infection that, I don't really call it a stealth infection because most people know when they have it, and that's Candida. And Candida is relatively easy to test for, not very easy to treat. But Candida is one of those that usually doesn't exist alone. So if you've been dealing with Candida, just know that there's a reason why you're getting Candida overgrowth, because Candida is an opportunistic yeast. It lives in our body all the time, in our mouth and our digestive system. And so if it's overgrowing, there's a reason for that. Usually it's because the good bacteria in our GI has been killed off, or you're in an imbalance where you're getting more bad bacteria and less good bacteria, and that's less competition for the Candida. Another thing that very strongly relates to Candida is radioactive metals. So that's another thing that's found in our drinking water. And then Candida is also related to other self-infections because, again, we have this chronically weakened immune system. So I'm going to stop drawing on my board now because it's getting a little bit too crowded, and I went into a little bit more than I wanted to with this, but I'm very passionate about these topics, and so that's why I like coming to you and kind of showing you how these different dots connect, because like I said, it can be overwhelming at first if you're looking at all these as separate, but when you start to connect all the dots, then it becomes a little less overwhelming, because then you start to realize, oh, there's a reason why I have activated Epstein-Barr virus. There's a reason why I'm still dealing with all of my symptoms from mycotoxins and Lyme and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to mention a couple more things. So as far as Candida, I do have a self-test questionnaire that is included with my What's Living Inside You webinar. And in that webinar, I go through and I give you action steps for each one of these stealth infections and toxins, so that you can start today, like right now, to reduce the symptoms and toxicity from these. And they aren't, really expensive or difficult. These action steps are things you can do. You don't need any special training or $1 million to do these action steps. I tried to make them very practical and doable, so that you can feel empowered to take that first step, because sometimes that's really the hardest part, is just the first step. And then the other thing is, with my What's Living Inside You webinar, there's also a discount code that I share at the end for those who stay to the end. And I'm just reminding you all of that because that code is going to expire at the end of Black Friday. So I know it's Thanksgiving and everybody, has a lot to do in the next, 48 to 72 hours. But if you have 38 minutes to watch that webinar, it is extremely valuable information. Like I said, I give you action points on how to deal with each of these stealth infections and toxins. And I also give you the Candida Self-Test Questionnaire, and I also give you a discount code. So thank you so much for tuning into my video. And I'm so grateful for all of you, each and every one of you. Thank you. And I hope that you all have a wonderful and blessed, happy Thanksgiving. Have a good night.